The moment he stepped onto the training yard, the air shifted in a way no one could quite explain. Private Cole Mercer moved with a quiet confidence that didn't match the fresh uniform on his back. Dust curled around his boots as if the ground itself hesitated to settle beneath him. Conversations faded, replaced by low murmurs and curious glances. 8 Marines leaned nearby, veterans of multiple deployments, their eyes sharp and assessing. They had seen rookies before. They knew how fear looked, how uncertainty moved through a man, but Mercer showed none of it. That alone was enough to irritate them. One of them, Corporal Hayes, pushed himself off the truck and cracked his neck slowly, a smirk forming as he stepped closer. "You lost, recruit?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few chuckles followed. Mercer didn't respond immediately. His gaze swept the yard once, calm and deliberate, taking in exits, distances, terrain. It wasn't obvious to most, but Daniels, watching from a distance, noticed it instantly. That wasn't a nervous glance. That was assessment. Hayes took Mercer's silence as weakness and stepped even closer, invading his space. "You deaf too?" he added, voice edged with mockery. The others began circling now, not aggressively at first, just enough to close the space. It was a familiar ritual. Break the new guy early, see what he's made of. Mercer finally looked at Hayes, his expression neutral, almost detached. "No," he said quietly, just one word. No anger, no hesitation. That answer should have eased things. Instead, it made something shift. The Marines exchanged looks, their amusement fading into curiosity mixed with challenge. Hayes grinned wider. "Good," he said. "Then you can hear this. You've got about 45 seconds before you're on your back." Laughter returned, louder this time. The circle tightened slightly, boots grinding against the dirt. Somewhere nearby, someone stopped working just to watch. Mercer didn't step back. He didn't raise his hands in defense. He simply adjusted the strap on his glove, slow and deliberate, as if preparing for routine work rather than a fight. Daniels narrowed his eyes from across the yard. He had seen that kind of movement before, but not from someone this young. It wasn't hesitation. It was timing. The first move came fast. Hayes lunged forward, confident and aggressive, aiming to overpower quickly. It was the kind of attack that worked on most recruits, but Mercer shifted just enough, barely a step, redirecting the momentum with minimal effort. Hayes stumbled past him, thrown off balance before he even realized what happened. In that same instant, Mercer struck, a precise motion that dropped Hayes hard into the dirt. The laughter stopped immediately. Another Marine reacted on instinct, charging in from the side. Mercer turned smoothly, his movements efficient, almost economical. A quick strike, a controlled sweep, and the second Marine hit the ground beside Hayes. Now the tension spiked. This wasn't going according to expectation. 2 more rushed in together, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. That should have worked. It always did. It didn't. Mercer moved through them like he had already rehearsed every step. He didn't waste energy. Every motion had purpose. A deflection here, a strike there, each one landing exactly where it needed to. Within seconds, both Marines were down, struggling to process what had just happened. The remaining 4 hesitated now, their confidence cracking, replaced by something unfamiliar: doubt. Daniels leaned forward slightly, his attention fully locked. He wasn't watching a fight anymore. He was watching a pattern unfold. The hesitation didn't last long. Pride pushed the remaining Marines forward. All 4 attacked at once, abandoning strategy for sheer force. The yard filled with motion, boots kicking up dust, bodies closing in. It should have ended Mercer right there. No one could handle that many trained fighters at once. No one normal. But Mercer wasn't reacting to them. He was ahead of them. He stepped into the chaos instead of away from it, slipping between strikes as if he could see them before they happened. One Marine swung wide. Mercer ducked early, countering before the attack fully extended. Another reached for him from behind. Mercer pivoted at the exact moment, using the man's own momentum to send him crashing into the others. The sequence continued, fluid and unstoppable. Seconds stretched, but the outcome became inevitable. One by one they fell. The final Marine hesitated just long enough to seal his fate. Mercer closed the distance instantly, disarming and dropping him with a single controlled movement. Then it was over, just like that. The dust began to settle again, slowly drifting back to the ground. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. 8 Marines lay, scattered across the yard. Mercer stood at the center, breathing steady, posture relaxed, as if he had just completed a simple drill. No signs of strain, no rush of adrenaline visible, just calm, unshaken calm. No one spoke. The watching soldiers stared, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. It didn't fit any expectation, any logic they were used to. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke. This was something else entirely. Daniels finally stepped forward, his boots echoing faintly against the hardened ground. The authority in his presence parted the silence as he approached the scene. His gaze moved over the fallen Marines briefly before settling on Mercer. Up close, the calm in Mercer's eyes was even more unsettling. "You didn't hold back," Daniels said, his voice measured. Mercer shook his head slightly. "No, sir." Daniels studied him for a moment longer, searching for something beneath the surface. Most soldiers would show something after a fight like that. Adrenaline, pride, even regret. Mercer showed none of it. Around them, the Marines began to stir, groaning as they pushed themselves up, their earlier confidence replaced by confusion and reluctant respect. Hayes sat up slowly, rubbing his jaw, staring at Mercer like he was trying to understand a language he didn't speak. Daniels took a slow breath. 45 seconds, he said quietly, almost to himself. Mercer didn't respond. But Daniels already knew. Whatever this recruit was, he wasn't here by accident. And whatever had trained him wasn't something the rest of the base was prepared for. The day after the incident, the training yard felt different. The usual clamor of drills, shouted commands, and the rhythmic thump of boots against dirt had returned, but under it lingered an unease no one could shake. Even the wind seemed hesitant, stirring dust slowly over the ground as if wary of waking what had been unleashed. The 8 Marines who had fallen the day before now moved cautiously, glancing at one another as though silently asking, "Did you see what he did?" Each step was careful, each gesture measured. Their previous arrogance, so palpable, had evaporated entirely, replaced by a wary, almost fearful respect. Staff Sergeant Daniels paced the perimeter of the yard, eyes sharp, arms crossed. He had seen rookies come and go, veterans rise and fall, and men pushed beyond their limits by circumstance and battle. But Mercer was different. The man wasn't just skilled. He was deliberate. Each strike, each movement had precision that suggested forethought beyond human reaction. Daniels had watched and analyzed, mentally replaying the scene again and again. The calculations didn't make sense. No ordinary soldier, no recruit, could neutralize 8 trained Marines in less than a minute. He had to know where Mercer came from, who trained him, and why he had been sent here. Daniels called in a favor that evening, reaching into channels long unused, files buried under layers of classification. He bypassed normal access, leaning on his reputation, experience, and discreet connections to pull up any record on this mystery recruit. The screen flickered as redacted documents loaded slowly, lines of data that hinted at something far larger. He found an enlistment record, sparse and heavily redacted, with almost all identifying information erased. Where the file should have listed prior assignments or training, only black boxes stared back at him. He scrolled further, finding a single visible line. Subject exhibits advanced combat anticipation beyond measurable baseline. That phrase repeated in his mind, echoing like a warning. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Mercer wasn't just talented. He had been engineered or trained in a way no conventional methods could explain. Daniel's instincts told him this recruit wasn't sent here to blend in or learn the ropes. He had a purpose, and that purpose likely involved more than routine training exercises. By the next morning, Mercer was already on the move. His calm demeanor remained unchanged, but whispers spread like wildfire through the base. Rumors painted him as a shadow of elite special forces, someone who had operated in secret programs that most hadn't even heard existed. Others believed he had been transferred under unusual circumstances, his history erased or altered. Every theory was more outrageous than the last. No one, not even Daniels, had the full story. And that only added to the tension, the curiosity and the fear. Mercer's presence altered every interaction. Marines who once joked freely with one another now watched him silently, aware of the threat he represented. He walked through the mess hall, greeted only by cautious nods. Even the base's canine units seemed unsettled, their growls low and uncertain as he passed. This was more than skill. It was control presence, an aura that disarmed anyone who came near. Daniels observed from his office, hands folded on the desk, analyzing behavior patterns, reading expressions, tracking subtle reactions. Mercer was affecting the entire base, whether intentionally or not. That afternoon, Daniels organized a live-fire urban combat drill. He assigned Mercer and the 8 Marines who had challenged him previously, now subdued and wary, to a single unit. Their faces betrayed a mixture of fear and determination. They had been humiliated, yes, but they were trained soldiers. Pride demanded they prove themselves under pressure. Daniels watched from the control tower, knowing this was no ordinary exercise. Mercer's behavior during the previous incident suggested he would handle the drill differently than anyone expected. The simulation began under clear skies, the sound of gunfire and shouted commands echoing across the training yard. The first wave of targets appeared, a mix of automated systems and fellow trainees playing hostiles. The 8 Marines hesitated initially, glancing at Mercer for guidance. Mercer didn't shout orders immediately. He didn't charge ahead. Instead, he moved deliberately, analyzing the terrain, scanning angles, calculating timing. Then he began to act. Commands were precise, minimal, delivered in a tone that brooked no question. Stack left, clear corner. The Marines obeyed automatically, guided not by fear but by trust. Mercer's movements were almost preternatural, flowing with a rhythm no one else could match. Targets fell before they could react, angles cleared before threats became visible. The entire exercise seemed to bend around him, controlled by his foresight and speed. Daniels felt an uneasy tension in his chest. This wasn't normal. This was something engineered, perfected, and terrifying in its efficiency. Halfway through the simulation, Daniels added a twist. Smoke bombs, additional hostile targets, communications cut, the standard stress test modifications he had used countless times before. The idea was to see how soldiers adapted to chaos. The 8 Marines faltered briefly, confusion setting in as their training collided with unpredictability. Mercer didn't falter, not for a single second. His eyes flicked to each threat, his body moving in anticipation rather than reaction. Commands flowed from him like water over stones, concise, authoritative, impossible to ignore. By the time the smoke cleared, all targets had been neutralized. The Marines moved as one, coordinated perfectly under Mercer's guidance. Daniels' mind raced. What he had seen defied explanation. This wasn't adaptability. This wasn't skill honed over time. Mercer was predicting outcomes, moving ahead of the simulation, controlling chaos as though it were scripted. And Daniels realized the implication. If Mercer could handle this controlled drill with such foresight, real combat scenarios would be even more lethal in his hands. After the exercise, Daniels confronted Mercer directly. The yard was empty, shadows stretching long in the fading light. "You knew every move before it happened," Daniels said sharply, his voice cutting through the hum of distant activity. Mercer didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He simply looked at Daniels, calm and unreadable. "No, sir," he replied quietly, the weight in his voice enough to stop Daniels mid-sentence. Daniels stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "What are you? Were you trained, enhanced, conditioned? Who sent you here?" Mercer's expression remained impassive, but for the first time a flicker of something, calculation, perhaps curiosity, crossed his features. "I'm what they made when they stopped asking if they should," he said. The sentence landed like a grenade. Daniels felt the chill immediately. That was not a soldier's answer. That was a statement about creation, purpose, and control beyond normal boundaries. 2 days later, the base went into lockdown. Alarms blared without warning, red lights flashing and broadcasting a threat level higher than any training exercise should ever reach. Daniel's thoughts went immediately to Mercer. When he rushed to the barracks, the bed was empty, untouched. Surveillance cameras displayed nothing but static at the exact moment Mercer should have appeared. This wasn't escape. This was intention. Someone or something had triggered a scenario, and Mercer had gone to confront it. Daniels assembled the same 8 Marines who had tested him, now hardened by fear and respect. "We find him," he ordered. Silence followed, not hesitation but understanding. They weren't chasing a recruit. They were following a force beyond comprehension, a man who operated under rules no one else understood. They moved quickly, navigating the darkened corridors, scanning every corner. Each step echoed the tension that wrapped the base like a thick fog. Mercer had a mission, and they were following into the unknown. They found him at the perimeter, standing alone in the desert under the pale light of night, drones circling silently above. A black transport vehicle lay wrecked nearby, its classified cargo scattered and destroyed. Mercer hadn't run, he had stopped something. Daniels approached cautiously, the 8 Marines forming a protective perimeter. "What did you stop?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. Mercer's eyes, calm and piercing, met Daniels briefly. "Something worse than me," he said. No elaboration, no explanation. The weight of those words sank immediately, heavier than any manual, heavier than any drill or report Daniels had ever encountered. Daniels understood then that Mercer was more than a soldier. He was a warning, a weapon, a solution designed for threats most of the world wouldn't comprehend until it was too late. The 8 Marines, once full of bravado, now stood in awe, silent, finally grasping the reality of the man before them. Mercer wasn't just the recruit who had bested them. He was the fulcrum upon which survival depended. And whatever storm was coming, they were going to face it together, or they wouldn't survive it at all. By the time they returned to the base, the whispers had multiplied. Every soldier, every officer, every instructor knew the story of what had occurred on the training yard and afterward. Mercer had become more than a person. He was a legend in waiting, a figure whose calm, lethal presence shifted the entire balance of power on the base. Daniels, still watching him from a distance, realized that his responsibility had changed. This wasn't about training anymore. This was about preparation for the unimaginable. Mercer was a weapon, and the world had no idea what was coming. And as Mercer walked back through the shadows, silent and deliberate, Daniels couldn't help but think, if he's the solution, then whatever he stopped, it's only the beginning. The day after the desert incident, the base seemed alive with tension, a quiet hum of curiosity and fear that no drill could have manufactured. Word of Mercer's actions had spread through every corridor, every mess hall, and even into the sleeping quarters where soldiers whispered in low tones, cautious not to be overheard. The 8 Marines who had confronted him earlier, now fully aware of his extraordinary abilities, kept a careful distance, exchanging silent, uneasy glances. Their pride had been shattered, replaced by a reluctant respect that simmered under the surface. Even veterans were beginning to speak his name in hushed reverence. Staff Sergeant Daniels sat in his office, staring at the encrypted files he had pulled the night before. The redacted portions mocked him, hiding everything about Mercer's previous training, his origins, and the programs that had shaped him. The phrase "advanced combat anticipation beyond measurable baseline" replayed in his mind again and again. It was almost clinical in its wording, but Daniels understood the meaning. Mercer was not merely talented, he was engineered. Someone had crafted a soldier who could predict and react faster than the human mind could normally process. And whoever had done, it had made a soldier who was now walking freely among them. Daniels had worked in classified operations before, seen programs designed to create elite soldiers, trained operatives, and conditioned killers. But Mercer's abilities surpassed anything in the field manuals or briefing documents he'd ever read. This was not training, not just conditioning. It was something else entirely. It was the culmination of years of experimentation, strategy, and manipulation. And Daniels realized, with a chill that ran down his spine, that he was not privy to the full extent of Mercer's abilities, or the threats that could accompany them. Daniels decided to observe him closely over the next few days. He had to understand him, not only for the safety of the base but for the operational integrity of the Marines he commanded. Mercer didn't make it easy. He moved through the base quietly, efficiently, performing routine tasks with such calm precision that it was impossible not to notice. But he did not flaunt his abilities. He did not draw attention. Instead, he operated under a mask of neutrality. His presence felt more than seen, an unsettling quiet that caused even hardened soldiers to pause and reconsider their movements when he was nearby. The live-fire urban combat drill scheduled for the next morning provided the perfect opportunity to observe him under pressure. Daniels ensured the 8 Marines who had previously challenged him were included in Mercer's unit. The exercise was meant to simulate high-stress urban warfare, with multiple unexpected variables, hostile threats, and communications interference designed to push the team to its limits. Daniels knew that if anyone could handle this drill, it would be Mercer. What he didn't know was how far Mercer would push beyond the boundaries of expectation. As the drill commenced, Mercer immediately assessed the environment. Unlike the other soldiers who reacted to stimuli with instinct and training, Mercer seemed to predict movement before it even occurred. His eyes scanned intersections, doorways, and vantage points with a precision that made it appear as though he could see through walls. He issued commands only when necessary, and those commands were brief, clear, and executed without hesitation. The 8 Marines followed him with a mixture of trust and awe, obeying instinctively rather than by choice. When simulated hostiles emerged, Mercer's team moved as one, a coordinated unit guided by his foresight. Each Marine struck precisely at the right moment, every maneuver timed to perfection. They neutralized targets faster than any previous team had ever managed in the exercise. Daniels, observing from the control tower, felt a mixture of disbelief and apprehension. This was no longer a drill. This was a demonstration of control that bordered on the impossible. Midway through the exercise, Daniels introduced chaos into the simulation: smoke bombs, additional hostile targets, and sudden communication failures. Most teams would have faltered under the confusion, hesitation spreading like wildfire. The 8 Marines under Mercer's direction, however, remained coordinated, moving seamlessly through the chaos. Commands flowed from Mercer efficiently, guiding each soldier without a single wasted motion. It was as if he could see the consequences of every action before it occurred, anticipating every variable with uncanny accuracy. The final segment of the drill tested adaptability under extreme stress. Automated targets moved unpredictably, simulated civilians were introduced into the scenario, and the terrain itself was altered with sudden obstacles. Most soldiers would have panicked, but Mercer's calm presence stabilized the unit. The Marines followed his lead without hesitation, executing complex maneuvers that seemed beyond their previous training. Every movement, every decision, reinforced the realization that Mercer operated on a different plane of perception. Daniels could only watch, feeling the weight of the truth settle on him. Mercer was more than a soldier, he was a phenomenon. After the exercise concluded, Daniels approached Mercer in the quiet of the empty yard. The dust had settled, the artificial chaos replaced by eerie calm. "You anticipated everything," Daniels said, his voice steady but edged with intensity. "Every move, every reaction, you were ahead of us all." "How?" Mercer did not answer immediately. He adjusted his gloves methodically, his expression unreadable. "No, sir," he replied quietly. Daniels pressed further, stepping closer. "You weren't trained like the others. Who are you, really? Where did you come from?" Mercer's eyes flickered, revealing the faintest trace of calculation. "I'm what they made when they stopped asking if they should," he said. The words hung heavy in the air, more chilling than any gunfire. Daniels understood immediately that Mercer's abilities were the result of deliberate design, not natural skill. Someone or some program had shaped him into a weapon, and now that weapon operated freely on the base. The implications were staggering. Mercer was no longer just a recruit. He was a living, walking solution to threats that the military had not even anticipated. 2 days later, the base experienced an unexpected security breach. Alarms blared, lights flashed red, and soldiers scrambled in panic. Daniel's mind went immediately to Mercer. When he reached the barracks, Mercer's bed was empty. Surveillance cameras showed nothing but static at the moment he should have appeared. This was no ordinary disappearance. This was deliberate. Mercer had left to intercept a threat before anyone else could respond. Daniels gathered the 8 Marines who had witnessed Mercer's skills firsthand. "We follow him," he ordered. The men nodded silently. Fear, respect, and awe united them in a way words could not. They tracked him to the perimeter where drones hovered hesitantly above a wrecked black transport vehicle. Mercer stood calmly amidst the debris, surveying the destruction with quiet precision. Daniels approached cautiously. "What happened?" he asked. Mercer's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Something worse than me," he said, voice low. Daniels didn't need more explanation. The weight of the statement carried itself, heavy and undeniable. The 8 Marines formed a protective perimeter, understanding instinctively that Mercer was not merely responding to a threat. He was preventing something catastrophic, something beyond their comprehension. Returning to the base, Daniels realized the truth. Mercer had become more than a recruit or a soldier. He was a legend in the making, a figure whose calm, lethal presence reshaped the entire environment. Soldiers moved differently around him, adapting unconsciously to his timing and foresight. Mercer's influence extended beyond combat ability. It affected morale, strategy, and perception. Daniels knew he needed to understand this soldier fully, not just for training purposes, but for survival. Mercer was a weapon, and the world had no idea what he could do. The whispers about Mercer intensified with every hour. Stories of his skill and control spread through the base, each retelling, exaggerating, distorting, and mythologizing what had occurred. Yet Daniels, despite the legends, focused on reality. Mercer's abilities were extraordinary, yes, but they were measurable, trackable, and potentially exploitable. Daniels resolved to observe, to study, and to prepare. If Mercer was a solution to a threat, Daniels knew that threat was far from over. He had seen hints of it in the redacted files, glimpses of classified programs and operations that suggested something massive and dangerous loomed on the horizon. Mercer, for his part, moved through the base with the same calm efficiency. He trained, ate, walked, and rested with precise timing. He did not boast or provoke. He simply existed, a constant presence that reshaped the behavior of everyone around him. The 8 Marines who had faced him initially followed his lead, now fully committed to his rhythm, executing drills and exercises with a seamless coordination born of trust and necessity. Even Daniels found himself relying on Mercer's insight, seeking his opinion in strategy discussions, unconsciously deferring to the soldier who had no official rank beyond private. By nightfall, Daniels sat alone in his office again, reviewing files and reports. Mercer had completed the day without incident, yet the implications of his actions weighed heavily. Someone had created a soldier capable of predicting outcomes, controlling chaos, and executing precision strikes under conditions that would overwhelm normal units. The level of foresight Mercer displayed was unprecedented, and Daniels could not shake the sense that the worst was still to come. If Mercer was a solution, then the problems he was designed to face were already in motion, waiting beyond the horizon. And in the quiet of the night, Mercer moved through the base, a silent shadow of anticipation. Every soldier sensed him, even those who had never met him. His presence was a promise of protection and a warning. Whatever lay ahead, Mercer was ready. And anyone who underestimated him, anyone who doubted his abilities, would soon learn that the recruit they had once mocked was far more than they could ever imagine. The sun had barely risen when the base rumbled with activity. Drills, equipment checks, and the clatter of boots on concrete filled the air, but beneath the routine, a tension lingered that could not be ignored. Even seasoned Marines moved more deliberately, eyes flicking toward the shadowed figure of Private Cole Mercer. His presence alone reshaped the tempo of the base. He walked among them silently, every step precise, almost deliberate, as if measuring the ground beneath him. There was no arrogance in his gait, no need to flaunt skill. Yet every soldier, from rookies to hardened veterans, instinctively recognized the unspoken authority radiating from him. Staff Sergeant Daniels had anticipated this day for weeks. Mercer had proven himself in the previous drills, in the desert incident, and in the urban simulation. Now it was time to observe him in a full-scale live-fire urban combat exercise designed to test the limits of every participant. Every variable would be unpredictable, chaotic, and dangerous. The 8 Marines who had confronted him before, now tempered with respect and fear, were once again assigned to his unit. Their previous arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a tense reliance on Mercer's judgment. "Remember the objectives," Daniels called as he stood above in the control tower. "Civilians, hostiles, and terrain challenges. Standard procedure, follow commands, trust your leader." His eyes flicked to Mercer. Mercer merely nodded, adjusting his gloves. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. To the others, it was unsettling. He didn't need approval or guidance. He simply existed in the zone of anticipation, steps ahead of everyone else. The simulation began with the usual chaos: smoke grenades, loud explosions, and scattered automated targets designed to emulate hostile combatants. The 8 Marines flinched slightly, their training and instincts clashing with the sensory overload. Mercer didn't flinch. He moved fluidly, scanning intersections, entrances, and vantage points before anyone could react. He issued commands, short, deliberate, and precise. "Stack left. Cover that corner. Move on my mark." The Marines obeyed instantly, operating almost mechanically, yet with uncanny synchronization. It was as if Mercer's foresight had extended to them, each movement orchestrated with near-perfect timing. Targets were neutralized before they could fully appear, corridors cleared before threats could occupy them, and the chaos of explosions and smoke became an organized, controlled rhythm under Mercer's influence. Daniel's unease grew. He had seen elite operators in training before, but nothing like this. Mercer's control over the environment and his team suggested a level of anticipation that bordered on preternatural. His team didn't merely follow him. They moved as extensions of his awareness, each Marine's instinct synchronized with Mercer's almost imperceptible cues. Every step he took shifted the battlefield, every glance dictated movement. Halfway through the exercise, Daniels activated an unexpected challenge. An additional wave of hostiles, unexpected civilians scattered across the terrain, and sudden communication blackouts. The 8 Marines faltered for a heartbeat, uncertainty creeping in like ice through their veins. Mercer didn't falter, not for a single second. His body adjusted, his voice rose only slightly, directing the Marines with absolute confidence. "Corners first. Stack right. No hesitation." Every command was obeyed without thought, every action executed flawlessly. Even under complete sensory disruption, Mercer maintained control. A simulated civilian screamed from a doorway. 2 hostiles emerged from opposite streets, aiming at the group simultaneously. The 8 Marines reacted instinctively, but it was Mercer who executed the decisive intervention. He moved first, striking with precision, redirecting the attackers, shielding the Marines, and neutralizing the threat with surgical efficiency. In less than 30 seconds, what should have been chaos was neutralized. Daniels' jaw tightened. This was no ordinary soldier. Mercer didn't just adapt. He anticipated outcomes that were theoretically unpredictable. The drill escalated further, introducing moving targets, hidden snipers, and collapsing obstacles. Mercer guided his unit seamlessly, anticipating not only threats but potential mistakes by the team itself. One Marine, Hayes, nearly tripped over debris in a blind alley, but Mercer shifted him with a subtle movement of his arm, preventing injury without breaking stride. Another soldier misread a doorway, stepping toward simulated fire. Mercer intercepted, guiding him safely past with minimal distraction. Every intervention was measured, efficient, and silent, leaving the Marines unaware of how close disaster had come. Daniel's mind raced. He had been a part of classified programs before, understood the mechanics of advanced training, but Mercer's abilities defied the logic of human reaction. He predicted movement, guided others, and executed strikes with the precision of someone who had already seen the outcome. Daniels felt a chill. If Mercer could perform this flawlessly in a controlled environment, the implications for real-world operations were staggering. He was a force multiplier, a tactical prodigy, and an enigma all at once. By the final stage of the drill, the simulated battlefield was nearly unrecognizable. Smoke-filled corridors, explosions echoed, targets shifted positions, and the terrain itself had been modified with sudden barriers. Mercer moved through it all as though he had rehearsed every moment in advance. He never raised his voice unnecessarily, never made a gesture without purpose. The Marines moved in perfect coordination, neutralizing threats, rescuing civilians, and maneuvering through dangerous zones without hesitation. Daniels watched, astonished. The exercise, which should have been a brutal test of chaos management, had become a demonstration of control under Mercer's command. When the exercise concluded, Daniels descended to the yard. Mercer stood quietly at the center, adjusting his gloves again, calm as if he had merely completed a routine task. The 8 Marines were sprawled around him, exhausted and awed. Their previous bravado had completely dissolved, replaced with reluctant admiration and, in some cases, fear. Daniels approached, his boots crunching in the dust. "You anticipated everything," he said, his voice measured but edged with disbelief. "Every movement, every reaction, you were ahead of us all. How?" Mercer looked up at him, expression neutral. "No, sir," he said quietly. Daniels frowned. "No," Mercer's gaze did not waver. "I observe, I react. I don't need to be ahead because I see the pattern. It is there, always." Daniels' unease deepened. Mercer's answer was not a boast, nor an explanation. It was a statement of fact. His abilities were instinctive but refined to a degree that bordered on impossible. Every outcome was anticipated, every scenario accounted for. Daniels realized then that Mercer was not simply a soldier. He was a living algorithm of combat, capable of executing maneuvers and decisions beyond the comprehension of ordinary humans. 2 days later, the base's alert systems blared without warning. Red lights flashed, sirens screamed, and chaos erupted. Daniel's thoughts immediately went to Mercer. He rushed to the barracks and found the bed empty, untouched. Surveillance footage showed nothing but static at the exact moment Mercer should have appeared. This was no ordinary disappearance. This was intentional, deliberate. Mercer had gone to confront a threat before anyone else could respond. Daniels gathered the 8 Marines who had witnessed his skills firsthand. "We follow him," he ordered. The men nodded in silent agreement, fear and respect uniting them in a single purpose. They found him at the perimeter, standing in the desert under the circling drones. The wreckage of a black transport vehicle lay nearby, its classified cargo destroyed. Mercer stood calmly, surveying the aftermath. Daniels approached cautiously. "What happened?" he demanded. Mercer's gaze was steady. "Something worse than me," he said. The statement carried weight far heavier than any military report. The 8 Marines formed a protective perimeter, understanding that Mercer was not merely responding to a threat. He was preventing a catastrophe beyond comprehension. Returning to the base, Daniels reflected on the implications. Mercer had become more than a recruit or a soldier. He was a legend in the making. Soldiers moved differently around him, adjusting unconsciously to his timing, anticipating his reactions. Even Daniels found himself deferring subtly, seeking Mercer's insight on strategy and coordination. Mercer's influence extended beyond physical ability. It shifted morale, perception, and command dynamics. He was a weapon, a solution, and a warning all at once. The whispers about Mercer intensified. Stories of his calm, precise control spread through the base, growing with each retelling. Yet Daniels, despite the legends, remained focused on reality. Mercer's abilities were extraordinary, but they were measurable, observable, and potentially exploitable if understood correctly. Daniels resolved to continue monitoring, studying, and preparing. If Mercer was a solution, the threat he was designed to counter was already moving, already growing beyond their anticipation. As night fell, Mercer moved through the base with silent precision. Every step was deliberate, every action calculated. Soldiers instinctively respected his presence, adapting their own movements to match the rhythm he established. The 8 Marines who had once mocked him now moved as extensions of his awareness, anticipating his guidance without conscious thought. Mercer was no longer a recruit. He was the fulcrum upon which survival depended. Daniels watched from his office, the red glow of the alert lights reflecting off his desk. He realized then that Mercer's presence was not only a tactical advantage, but a psychological one. Fear, respect, and awe were tools he wielded unconsciously, shaping the entire base. Whatever threat loomed beyond the perimeter, Mercer was prepared. And Daniels understood that if Mercer was ready, then the challenge they were about to face was unlike anything they had encountered before. The quiet hum of the base deepened as night fell completely. Mercer, standing alone for a moment outside the perimeter, seemed to sense the invisible currents of threat surrounding the base. His calm presence, unyielding and precise, was a promise of protection, and a warning to anyone who underestimated him. He had moved beyond training, beyond protocol. He existed on a different level, one that the base and the military had never fully prepared to understand. And as Daniels observed him from afar, he realized the inevitable truth. Mercer was the solution to a threat no one could yet define, and whatever was coming, it would test everything they thought they knew about war, skill, and survival. The following morning dawned like any other on the base, yet the air was heavy with anticipation. Even the veteran Marines moved with an edge, eyes flicking toward Private Cole Mercer as he methodically adjusted his gear. It wasn't arrogance that radiated from him. There was none, but every motion seemed deliberate, as if the world bent subtly to his awareness. Staff Sergeant Daniels watched from his elevated post, sensing the tension ripple through the ranks. The events of the past week had already reshaped the base's dynamics. Soldiers who had once scoffed now whispered his name in awe. Rumors of his precision, foresight, and control had spread farther than anyone expected. Daniels had planned an advanced training exercise today, designed to simulate a chaotic urban battlefield with multiple layers of threats: hostiles, civilians, improvised obstacles, and unpredictable environmental changes. The 8 Marines who had once confronted Mercer were again assigned to his team, now fully aware of his abilities and functioning under a mix of fear, respect, and reliance. The exercise would push them to their limits, a true test of Mercer's ability to lead under extreme conditions. Daniels knew that this drill could also reveal cracks, if Mercer had any. The exercise began with a sharp explosion, signaling the sudden activation of hostile drones and simulated armed combatants. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid, reducing visibility to mere feet. The 8 Marines reacted instinctively, scanning for threats, but the initial shock caused hesitation. Mercer, calm as ever, assessed the terrain, noting each entry point, obstacle, and line of sight. His eyes flicked rapidly, analyzing patterns in the movements of his team and the targets. Then, with a measured step, he moved forward, issuing concise commands. "Stack left, clear corners, keep movement synchronized," he ordered, his voice low but precise. The Marines obeyed instantly, each action guided by his silent authority. Their movements became seamless, coordinated, as if their instincts were tied directly to his foresight. Drones swooped in from unexpected angles, and automated targets emerged from alleys, but Mercer's team reacted flawlessly. One drone swooped low, threatening to hit Corporal Hayes. Mercer's hand flicked, and Hayes adjusted mid-stride, narrowly avoiding disaster. Mercer's anticipation extended to the team itself, correcting mistakes before they happened, keeping everyone in line without apparent effort. Daniels watched from above, mind racing. This wasn't training, it was orchestration. Mercer was no longer merely reacting to stimuli. He predicted outcomes before they unfolded. Every movement, every threat, every decision played into a pattern that Mercer seemed to know instinctively. The 8 Marines operated almost as extensions of him, executing maneuvers they hadn't fully trained for, yet accomplishing them flawlessly. Even under extreme duress, Mercer maintained control, adjusting dynamically to unforeseen threats. The simulation escalated. Civilians were introduced into the battlefield, running unpredictably, forcing Marines to discern friend from foe under heavy pressure. Explosions triggered structural collapses, sending debris scattering across the streets. Mercer moved fluidly, interweaving his team through the chaos, neutralizing hostiles, protecting civilians, and predicting the environmental hazards before they fully manifested. One Marine, reaching for cover behind a crumbling wall, almost stumbled into the path of an oncoming obstacle. Mercer intercepted, adjusting the man's trajectory with a subtle nudge, preventing injury without breaking stride. A second wave of hostile targets emerged, doubling the pressure. Automated drones buzzed overhead, their targeting systems calibrated to mimic real-world unpredictability. One drone descended toward Private Jensen, weapons systems active. Mercer shifted instantly, intercepting the drone with a precise strike that sent it spinning harmlessly away. Jensen froze momentarily, awestruck. Mercer moved past him without acknowledgement, already calculating the next threat. The others followed instinctively, their fear replaced with a strange confidence. Trust in Mercer had become automatic, instinctive, and complete. Daniels felt a chill. He had orchestrated chaos, but Mercer had turned it into a dance of deadly precision. The soldiers moved in a synchronized rhythm that should have been impossible, neutralizing each threat, managing civilians, and navigating hazards without hesitation. Every second was calculated, every decision seemingly anticipated. Daniels realized the magnitude of what he was witnessing. Mercer wasn't just leading. He was controlling time itself in a limited battlefield sense, predicting outcomes as if the future were visible to him. The final stage of the simulation introduced a collapsing structure designed to simulate an urban firefight with limited exits and multiple hostiles. Smoke and dust filled the hallways as Marines moved cautiously, weapons raised. Mercer led from the front, scanning every corner before entering. 2 hostiles emerged from opposite corridors, attempting to flank the unit. Mercer anticipated the movement before it fully unfolded. He intercepted one with a precise maneuver, neutralizing him without injury. The second attacker was intercepted by the 8 Marines, their coordination flawless under his guidance. Amid the chaos, a simulated civilian screamed from a doorway. One Marine, Hayes, was distracted and nearly exposed himself to enemy fire. Mercer moved without hesitation, physically guiding him to cover while simultaneously neutralizing the hostile target. The seamless execution of multiple simultaneous actions left Daniels nearly speechless. Mercer wasn't reacting to the battlefield. He was orchestrating it. Every movement, every threat, every team member's action was accounted for and directed with surgical precision. By the time the dust cleared, the entire simulated battlefield had been neutralized. Every hostile threat had been eliminated, civilians were evacuated, and the 8 Marines had executed complex maneuvers flawlessly. Daniels descended to the yard, dust still clinging to his boots. Mercer stood at the center, adjusting his gloves again, calm, collected, as if nothing had occurred. The 8 Marines sprawled around him, exhausted and humbled. Daniels approached him cautiously. "You anticipated everything," he said, voice low, edged with awe. "Every movement, every reaction, you were ahead of us all." "How?" Mercer looked up, expression neutral. "No, sir," he said quietly. Daniels frowned. "No," Mercer's gaze remained steady. "I observe, I calculate, I act. I don't need to be ahead because I see the pattern before it happens." Daniels felt the weight of the words settle in his chest. This was no ordinary soldier. Mercer's abilities weren't simply a matter of skill. They were engineered, honed, and refined beyond normal human capability. He had trained for anticipation, for precision, and for control over outcomes that ordinary humans could not perceive. Daniels realized the implications. Mercer was a living weapon, a force multiplier, capable of reshaping the battlefield in ways no conventional soldier could. 2 days later, an unexpected breach alarm shattered the early morning calm. Red lights flashed, sirens screamed, and chaos erupted across the base. Daniel's mind went immediately to Mercer. He rushed to the barracks to find the bed empty. Surveillance footage displayed only static at the moment Mercer should have been present. This was no ordinary disappearance. It was intentional. Mercer had moved to intercept a threat before anyone else could respond. Daniels quickly assembled the 8 Marines who had witnessed Mercer's abilities firsthand. "We follow him," he commanded. The team moved silently but quickly, their trust in Mercer absolute. Fear, respect, and awe united them, binding their movements. They tracked him to the perimeter, where drones hovered hesitantly above the wreckage of a black transport vehicle. Mercer stood calmly amid the debris, surveying the aftermath with deliberate precision. Daniels approached cautiously. "What happened?" he demanded. Mercer's gaze met his, unwavering. "Something worse than me," he said, voice low and deliberate. The weight of the statement pressed down on Daniels, heavy with implication. The 8 Marines formed a protective perimeter, instinctively understanding that Mercer was not merely responding to a threat, he was preventing a catastrophe beyond comprehension. Returning to the base, Daniels reflected on the broader implications. Mercer had become more than a recruit, he had become a legend in the making. His mere presence influenced soldiers, shaping behavior, coordination, and perception. Even Daniels found himself seeking Mercer's insight, unconsciously deferring to the recruit's judgment. Mercer's influence extended beyond skill. It touched morale, strategy, and the psychological fabric of the unit. He was a weapon, a solution, and a warning all at once. The whispers about Mercer intensified with every hour. Tales of his calm, precise control spread through the base, growing with each retelling. Yet Daniels focused on the facts. Mercer's abilities were extraordinary, measurable, and, if understood, potentially exploitable. Daniels resolved to continue monitoring, studying, and preparing. If Mercer was the solution, then the threat he was designed to counter was already moving, growing beyond anticipation. That night, Mercer moved through the base with his usual calm, every motion deliberate, every step measured. Soldiers instinctively adjusted their movements, harmonizing with his rhythm without conscious effort. The 8 Marines who had once mocked him now moved as extensions of his awareness, responding instinctively to his guidance. Mercer had transcended the role of recruit. He was the fulcrum on which survival depended. Daniels watched from the office window, the red glow of alert lights reflecting off his desk. He realized then that Mercer's presence was more than tactical, it was psychological. Fear, respect, and awe were tools Mercer wielded effortlessly, shaping the base without a word. Whatever threat loomed, Mercer was ready. And Daniels knew, if Mercer was prepared, the danger they faced was unlike anything they had ever encountered. By dawn, the base was quiet, but Daniels' mind was not. Mercer, standing alone on the perimeter, seemed to sense the currents of threats surrounding them. His calm, lethal presence was a promise and a warning. He had moved beyond training, beyond rules, beyond expectation. He existed on a level the military had never accounted for. And as Daniels observed, the inevitable truth settled in. Mercer was the solution to a threat no one yet understood, and whatever was coming, it would test everything they knew about combat, skill, and survival. The night had barely deepened when Staff Sergeant Daniels realized that the quiet over the base was deceptive. While the rest of the soldiers slept, or tried to, Private Cole Mercer remained in motion. He walked the perimeter silently, boots barely making a sound on the hardened earth, every sense attuned to the invisible threats swirling beyond the base. The moonlight outlined his figure, calm and precise, but there was a weight to his movements, a controlled intensity that suggested he was preparing for more than routine security. Something was coming. Daniels could feel it even from his office, a tension heavier than any drill or simulated attack. Daniels had watched Mercer operate over the past week, and each observation had unsettled him further. Mercer's abilities weren't just physical, they were analytical, instinctive, and somehow predictive. He didn't just react, he calculated outcomes before the threat even existed. The implications were staggering. A man like Mercer could dominate any battlefield, anticipate every enemy maneuver, and guide a team to flawless execution under chaos that would crush normal soldiers. Daniels realized he was witnessing not a soldier, but an operative designed to handle scenarios the military had never fully disclosed. Earlier that day, Daniels had reviewed the redacted files again. Nearly every detail of Mercer's past had been erased, leaving only fragments, odd designations, classified operation codes, and one unnerving note. Subject exhibits anticipatory combat sequencing beyond measurable baseline. No dates, no units, no instructors, just a line that suggested he had been trained, enhanced, or perhaps conditioned, in ways the base had no context for. Daniels tried to piece it together, but the gaps were immense. Whoever had made Mercer had not only erased his past, they had deliberately obscured it to prevent anyone from understanding the full extent of his capabilities. A soft comms beep alerted Daniels. The 8 Marines who had witnessed Mercer's skill in the drills and desert scenario were reporting a disturbance near the southern perimeter. Daniels grabbed his flashlight and helmet, moving quickly to join them. When he arrived, Mercer was already there, scanning the area, standing perfectly still despite the harsh desert wind and low visibility. His calmness contrasted sharply with the anxious tension of the Marines. Hayes and Jensen exchanged nervous glances, aware that Mercer had detected something they could not. 2 unauthorized vehicles approaching, Mercer said quietly, his voice low but commanding. No one had told him anything, he had simply observed. Daniels signaled to the Marines to take cover and called for backup, but Mercer gestured subtly, halting the movement. "We handle this first," he said. Every Marine obeyed, instinctively trusting the recruit whose abilities had repeatedly defied explanation. The vehicles approached, headlights piercing the darkness. Mercer's eyes narrowed, calculating trajectories, distances, and timing. "Move when I say. One at a time. Neutralize without alerting the others," he instructed. His hands moved with precision, adjusting gear, checking weapons, calculating angles, and predicting the behavior of the approaching threat. The Marines followed silently, their trust in him absolute. The first vehicle slowed, a heavily armored truck clearly out of place near the perimeter. Mercer stepped forward, anticipating the movements of the driver. "Now," he whispered. In a fluid motion, he disabled the vehicle's engine with a well-aimed explosive charge, forcing it to halt abruptly. The Marines moved immediately, securing the area as Mercer assessed the second vehicle. Every movement was controlled, synchronized, and precise. The second truck attempted to flank, but Mercer anticipated the maneuver, positioning the Marines strategically to block it without drawing fire. Daniels' mind raced. This was no drill, no exercise, this was real. Yet Mercer's calm, deliberate actions turned what should have been chaos into a perfectly controlled situation. Each step, each command, each calculation revealed not just skill, but anticipation of outcomes that could not be predicted by conventional soldiers. Daniels realized with growing unease that Mercer was operating at a level beyond the military's standard training, a level that seemed almost impossible. After securing the area, Mercer crouched near the first vehicle, scanning its interior. "Weapons cache," he said quietly. "Explosives, improvised. Someone was preparing an attack." The Marines exchanged stunned looks. Mercer continued, "They were watching, waiting for a distraction. We arrived too early." Daniels' stomach tightened. Mercer's foresight wasn't just tactical, it was situational, predictive, and immediate. Whoever had trained him had created a soldier capable of reading intentions, anticipating strategies, and executing decisive action without hesitation. Daniels turned to Mercer, attempting to gauge his thought process. "How did you know they were here?" he asked. Mercer didn't hesitate. "Patterns," he said simply. "Vehicles, movements, timing. They repeat signals unconsciously until someone observes." "I observed." Daniels frowned. He had heard the explanation, but it barely satisfied him. This was not luck or intuition. This was an engineered awareness, honed to the point that Mercer could see the battlefield before it existed, predict human behavior with uncanny accuracy, and act decisively. The team secured the perimeter and neutralized all threats without casualties. Mercer returned to his position, calm, adjusting his gloves. The 8 Marines followed, exhausted but awed. Hayes muttered under his breath, "How does he do it? He's not human." Mercer didn't respond, moving silently to survey the area again. Daniels, standing behind him, felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. Mercer wasn't just a soldier. He was a weapon, and the threats he prevented were only the beginning. Daniels spent the rest of the night reviewing the events, replaying the sequence in his mind. Mercer's abilities were extraordinary, and he had no idea of the full extent. This recruit could anticipate outcomes, control chaos, and lead teams with flawless execution. Every drill, every desert encounter, every live-fire exercise had demonstrated a pattern. Mercer was beyond ordinary human capability. And whoever had created him had intended him for something larger, something still hidden in the shadows of military operations. The next morning, Mercer walked through the base with the same calm precision. His presence influenced everyone around him, subtly shaping movements, decisions, and behavior. The 8 Marines moved with him, functioning as extensions of his perception, almost instinctively, following subtle gestures, minute cues, and timing Mercer alone seemed to perceive. Staff Sergeant Daniels realized that Mercer's influence was psychological as well as tactical. Fear, respect, and trust were all instruments in Mercer's control, and the soldiers responded with complete loyalty and efficiency. As the sun rose higher, Daniels called a briefing. He reviewed the surveillance footage, noting how Mercer had neutralized the threats with surgical efficiency, predicted movements, and directed his team seamlessly. He also reviewed redacted files, trying to piece together the fragments of Mercer's past. There were codes, classified operations, and designations that hinted at clandestine programs, but the details were deliberately erased. Whoever had trained Mercer had left no trace. Daniels realized that understanding him fully was impossible, but observing him closely was the next best option. Even as Daniels pondered the implications, Mercer had already moved beyond observation. He had returned to the perimeter, eyes scanning the horizon, posture relaxed but alert. The recruits and Marines followed, aware that his awareness extended beyond their perception. The base, the perimeter, the environment, all of it seemed to bend around his anticipation. Daniels knew then that whatever threat was coming, Mercer would confront it. And the military, the base, and everyone within its walls had no idea just how much power had been unleashed. Night fell again and the tension thickened. Mercer stood alone, surveying the darkness with unmatched focus. The 8 Marines, though skilled and trained, felt a strange mix of awe and apprehension. Daniels, watching from afar, realized that Mercer was not just a recruit or a soldier. He was a living solution, a force designed for scenarios no one had prepared for. He could predict movement, neutralize threats, guide teams, and prevent catastrophe, all with the calm demeanor of someone executing routine tasks. Daniels thought back to Mercer's words, "I'm what they made when they stopped asking if they should." The statement carried weight beyond comprehension. Mercer's existence was a reminder that some solutions were born of necessity, created deliberately, and deployed with precision. And as Daniels considered the implications, he understood the inevitable truth. If Mercer was the solution, then whatever threat loomed beyond the horizon was far greater than anyone had imagined. The base settled into a tense quiet. Mercer, ever vigilant, remained in motion, a silent guardian on the perimeter. The 8 Marines who had once mocked him now moved with him as extensions of his perception, their coordination perfect, their obedience instinctive. And Staff Sergeant Daniels, observing from a distance, realized that he was witnessing the emergence of a soldier unlike any other, someone whose existence would change the rules of engagement, the expectations of survival, and the definition of combat itself. Whatever lay ahead, Mercer was ready, and anyone who underestimated him, anyone who doubted his abilities, would soon learn that the recruit they had mocked was far more than they could ever imagine. The base was on edge. The events of the previous week had left a lingering unease, like an invisible weight pressing down on every soldier. Even the seasoned veterans moved with caution, eyes darting toward Private Cole Mercer. His presence was no longer just observed. It was felt, a silent tension that reshaped the environment. The 8 Marines who had followed him through desert drills, live fire simulations, and perimeter breaches now moved with him almost instinctively, reacting to subtle cues only Mercer seemed to perceive. Staff Sergeant Daniels had convened a briefing in the early morning hours. Satellite feeds indicated unusual activity outside the base's perimeter, convoys moving in unpredictable patterns, signals intercepted that suggested hostile surveillance, and unidentified drones circling in ways that defied normal operational logic. "We may be facing a coordinated threat," Daniels explained, his voice taut with urgency. "Prepare for a full-scale breach. Stay alert, follow orders, and trust your team." His eyes, however, betrayed the real concern: Mercer. Mercer had already left the briefing. He moved silently through the base, scanning for anomalies with a precision that defied explanation. His calmness contrasted sharply with the soldiers' growing apprehension. Each step, each glance, each shift of weight was calculated, as if the terrain itself had an invisible rhythm only Mercer could hear. The 8 Marines followed at a discreet distance, their trust in him absolute, their own instincts now aligned with his. The first sign of the breach came as the outer fence alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the perimeter, accompanied by the low hum of drones approaching. Mercer didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the southern sector, the Marines falling into formation behind him. Their movement was fluid, seamless, the product of repeated drills under Mercer's precise guidance. Even when a drone hovered directly above, scanning for heat signatures, Mercer adjusted his posture and pace, directing the Marines to cover while staying outside the drone's detection path. Daniels observed from the control tower, heart pounding. This was no simulation. Mercer's anticipation was being tested under real-world conditions, and every prediction he made seemed to unfold exactly as expected. The first breach point was an unmanned vehicle attempting to ram the fence. Mercer moved before anyone else could react, intercepting it with calculated force, sending it spinning harmlessly into the desert sand. The Marines followed, neutralizing additional automated threats before they could compromise the perimeter. The intruders were not conventional. Small, coordinated units emerged from hidden routes, moving with military precision and advanced tactical awareness. Mercer anticipated their patterns, positioning his team to counter before engagement could escalate. He directed the Marines with subtle gestures, almost imperceptible shifts of weight or glance. They moved in perfect synchronization, neutralizing threats before bullets could be fired. Daniels realized with a sinking feeling that Mercer's predictive ability was not just tactical, it was anticipatory to the point of preemptive dominance. One group of intruders attempted to flank through a narrow alley. Mercer intercepted, disabling their communications and cutting off their escape route. "Angles," he muttered, almost to himself, as he directed the Marines to take precise positions. The enemy team adjusted, attempting to create chaos, but Mercer's foresight rendered their maneuvers ineffective. Every obstacle, every environmental variable, every human action had already been accounted for in his calculations. The Marines operated almost as extensions of Mercer's perception, reacting instinctively to threats before they became imminent. Daniels reviewed the perimeter cameras. It was as if the battlefield had become a chessboard, and Mercer saw moves in advance that no one else could anticipate. He neutralized multiple intruders simultaneously, guided his Marines with exact timing, and coordinated defensive positions that rendered the breach attempts ineffective. Even under extreme stress, Mercer remained calm, deliberate, and methodical. The chaos that should have overwhelmed the unit became an orchestrated response, executed with surgical precision. The second wave of intruders escalated the situation. Armed with heavier weapons and accompanied by drones equipped with tracking systems, they advanced aggressively. Mercer anticipated their attack patterns, directing his Marines to intercept and isolate each threat. When one soldier was pinned down by a drone's targeting system, Mercer reacted instantly, neutralizing the drone with minimal movement while simultaneously providing cover. The Marines, trained for urban combat, followed his lead flawlessly, responding without hesitation to cues only Mercer seemed to perceive. Daniels could feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. Mercer was not merely surviving, he was controlling the battlefield. The intruders' coordination suggested professional training, yet they were consistently outmaneuvered. Every offensive maneuver they attempted had already been calculated and countered by Mercer. Daniels realized that this was not ordinary combat. Mercer was operating on a level beyond conventional tactics, predicting enemy behavior before it occurred and guiding his team to flawless execution under extreme stress. The breach escalated further as the intruders deployed improvised explosives, attempting to create chaos and confusion. Mercer calculated trajectories, blast radii, and timing, directing his Marines to intercept with exact precision. A grenade landed near Jensen, but Mercer moved with preternatural speed, pushing him out of harm's way and neutralizing the device before detonation. The 8 Marines executed simultaneous maneuvers, coordinating attacks, neutralizing threats, and protecting civilians within the simulation area, all under Mercer's silent guidance. By the time the intruders had been fully neutralized, the perimeter was secure. Mercer had orchestrated every action, every decision, every movement with flawless execution. The 8 Marines, exhausted and humbled, followed him back to the center of the base. Daniels descended from the tower, awestruck. "You predicted everything," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Every move, every action, you were ahead of us all. How?" Mercer's gaze met his, calm and unreadable. "No, sir," he replied quietly. "I observe, I calculate, I act. I don't need to be ahead because I see the pattern before it unfolds." Daniels could only shake his head. Mercer's abilities were beyond understanding. He was not merely a soldier, he was a living algorithm, capable of anticipating outcomes, guiding teams, and controlling chaos with precision that defied conventional logic. Later that evening, Daniels reviewed the situation. Mercer had neutralized a coordinated breach attempt, guided his team flawlessly, and prevented what could have been catastrophic casualties. Even the seasoned veterans of the base acknowledged his skill, some with fear, others with admiration. Mercer had become more than a recruit. He had become a force multiplier, a tactical prodigy, and a legend in the making. Daniels reflected on Mercer's words from earlier weeks. "I am what they made when they stopped asking if they should." The statement carried a chilling weight. Mercer was engineered for scenarios no ordinary soldier could handle. His foresight, his anticipatory skills, and his calm precision were products of deliberate design, and whatever threat he had just neutralized was only the beginning. Daniels understood the inevitable truth. Mercer was the solution to dangers that were already in motion, lurking beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike. Night fell and the base settled into a tense quiet. Mercer moved along the perimeter, vigilant and unyielding. The 8 Marines followed his cues instinctively, operating as extensions of his awareness. Daniels watched from a distance, realizing that Mercer's influence was not merely tactical, It was psychological, reshaping the behavior, confidence, and decisions of everyone around him. The calm, lethal presence of Mercer was a warning and a promise. He had moved beyond the role of recruit, beyond protocol, and beyond expectation. He existed on a level the military had never accounted for, and Daniels understood the inevitable. If Mercer was prepared, then the threat approaching the base was unlike anything they had faced before. Whatever was coming would test every skill, every strategy, and every ounce of courage the Marines possessed. Mercer, standing on the perimeter, silent and watchful, seemed to sense the invisible currents of danger surrounding the base. His calm precision was not just a tool, it was a shield, a weapon, and a premonition. He had moved beyond the ordinary, beyond the predictable, and beyond human comprehension. Whatever threat approached, Mercer would confront it, and the world had no idea of the storm that was about to descend. Daniels, observing him from the shadows, realized the terrifying truth. The recruit they had mocked was no longer a recruit. He was a legend, a tactical genius, a force that could not be measured by conventional means. And if Mercer was the solution, then the threat was bigger than anyone could imagine, and it had only just begun. Dawn broke over the base with an unsettling clarity. The desert air was dry, heavy, and tense, carrying the remnants of the previous night's chaos. Staff Sergeant Daniels stood atop the control tower, eyes scanning the horizon for the first signs of movement. He had learned by now that Mercer's calmness was never passive. It was anticipation. And if Mercer had moved ahead of every drill, every breach, and every simulation, then today would demand something far beyond anything the base had endured. The perimeter was quiet, almost too quiet. No alarms blared, no drones hummed overhead. Yet Mercer's posture was taut, every sense alive. He had already completed a full circuit, inspecting fences, gates, and blind spots, anticipating vulnerabilities the others didn't even know existed. The 8 Marines who had been assigned to him followed without question, each trained to react instinctively to his cues. This was no longer about drills or simulations. Today, they faced a real, coordinated threat, and Mercer was the fulcrum upon which their survival depended. Daniels checked the satellite feeds. Convoys were approaching from multiple directions, heavily armed and moving in unpredictable patterns. Mercer had predicted these movements, positioning his Marines strategically across the base. "Stay sharp," Mercer muttered, scanning the desert through binoculars. "They'll test our boundaries first, observe, then react, but only when necessary." His words were sparse, precise, and carried authority that transcended rank. The Marines nodded, following his lead, their confidence anchored in Mercer's foresight. The first wave hit the outer perimeter with a thunderous assault. Explosions shook the desert floor, punctuated by heavy gunfire. Automated drones swooped from above, weapons systems locked on heat signatures. Most soldiers would have panicked, but Mercer moved with an eerie calm. He predicted each movement before it occurred, positioning the Marines to intercept threats before they could escalate. A vehicle attempted to breach the southern gate. Mercer calculated the trajectory, issued one word of command, and the Marines disabled it with precision fire. Daniels watched, awe and fear warring in his chest. Mercer's ability to control the battlefield went beyond tactical skill. It was preemptive mastery. Every move, every attack, every environmental hazard had been accounted for. Even the 8 Marines under his direct guidance moved with near-perfect synchronization, neutralizing threats almost before they existed. Mercer was orchestrating chaos, turning it into a controlled symphony of action. The attackers escalated. A heavily armored vehicle emerged from a canyon, firing suppressive rounds at the base. Mercer anticipated its trajectory, calculating angles, cover, and timing with preternatural precision. He directed the Marines to position themselves strategically, neutralizing enemy fire while avoiding casualties. The vehicle was immobilized with a combination of explosives and coordinated fire. Mercer's prediction had been perfect. The attackers hadn't expected such precision, and they faltered, buying crucial time. Then came the unexpected. An elite squad of hostiles, trained, coordinated, and aggressive, attempted to infiltrate the western sector. Mercer's senses seemed to expand. He positioned his Marines with exacting precision, predicting every approach, every maneuver, every line of sight. The squad advanced, but Mercer's foresight rendered their strategies ineffective. He neutralized threats with minimal effort, using anticipation as a weapon. One Marine, Hayes, nearly exposed himself, but Mercer adjusted him mid-step, preventing disaster while continuing to orchestrate the battlefield. Daniels felt a mix of exhilaration and terror. Mercer wasn't just surviving the attack, he was controlling it. Every movement, every decision, every potential threat was preemptively calculated. Mercer had transformed chaos into order, turning the attackers' advantage into their undoing. The elite squad faltered, and the remaining vehicles were intercepted with the exact timing Mercer had predicted. Each maneuver was flawless, executed under pressure that would have shattered normal soldiers. Then the final wave arrived, a heavily armored convoy accompanied by drones, advanced surveillance, and a coordinated infantry assault. This was the ultimate test, the full force of the threat Mercer had anticipated for weeks. The soldiers outside the perimeter moved nervously, but the 8 Marines with Mercer followed instinctively, every movement guided by his silent commands. The battlefield became a chessboard, and Mercer's foresight dictated every play. He moved like a shadow, calculating outcomes, directing Marines, neutralizing threats, and protecting civilians within the simulation zones. A drone descended on Mercer's position. He intercepted it with precise timing, redirecting it harmlessly while simultaneously guiding the Marines to intercept an approaching armored vehicle. Every action was measured, deliberate, and perfectly timed. Daniels realized the full magnitude of Mercer's abilities. He could not only predict outcomes, he could manipulate the battlefield to shape them. Amid the chaos, Mercer detected a new anomaly, an explosive device planted near the command center, timed to detonate during the peak of the assault. He calculated the precise moment to intercept. In a single fluid motion, he disarmed the device while simultaneously guiding 2 Marines to intercept hostiles attempting to flank. Daniels felt his stomach twist. No drill had ever demanded this level of simultaneous action. Mercer had become a force that could operate beyond the limits of ordinary human capability, neutralizing multiple high-stakes threats at once with uncanny precision. The attackers, realizing their strategies had failed repeatedly, attempted to regroup and overwhelm the perimeter. Mercer anticipated their regrouping, predicting where they would focus next. He moved decisively, issuing subtle cues to the 8 Marines, who executed simultaneous maneuvers that neutralized the final threats without casualties. The base was secure. The assault, which should have overwhelmed them, had been neutralized almost entirely by Mercer's anticipatory skill and calculated control. Daniels approached Mercer in the aftermath, dust and debris swirling around them. "You predicted everything," he said, voice strained, a mix of relief and awe. "Every move, every action, you were ahead of all of us." "How?" Mercer's gaze met his, calm and unreadable. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I observe, I calculate, I act. I do not need to be ahead because I see the pattern before it unfolds." Daniels understood immediately. This was not instinct, not intuition. Mercer's mind operated like a tactical algorithm, capable of predicting outcomes and guiding action with unmatched precision. The 8 Marines who had fought beside him were exhausted, shaken, and awed. Hayes muttered under his breath, "He's not human, he can see the future." Mercer didn't respond, moving silently through the battlefield to check the perimeter again, ensuring no residual threats remained. The soldiers followed instinctively, their trust in him absolute. Later, in the quiet of the base, Daniels reviewed every detail of the assault. Mercer had neutralized a multi-directional attack, predicted enemy strategies, guided his team flawlessly, and prevented what could have been catastrophic losses. His abilities had been honed beyond anything Daniels had witnessed before. Mercer was no longer a recruit or soldier. He was a living weapon, a force multiplier, and a tactical phenomenon beyond comprehension. Daniels reflected on Mercer's earlier words, "I'm what they made when they stopped asking if they should." The weight of that statement resonated deeply. Mercer's existence was deliberate, designed to operate in situations that no ordinary soldier could manage, and the threats he had faced were only the beginning. Whoever had engineered him had anticipated challenges far beyond conventional warfare, and Mercer had risen to meet them with calculated precision. As night fell, Mercer stood on the perimeter, observing the desert beyond the base. The 8 Marines moved with him as extensions of his awareness, responding instinctively to subtle cues. Daniels watched from afar, realizing that Mercer's influence was not only tactical but psychological, shaping the perception, confidence, and actions of everyone around him. The calm, lethal presence of Mercer was a warning and a promise. He had transcended training, protocol, and expectation. He existed on a level the military had never accounted for, and Daniels knew the inevitable truth. If Mercer was prepared, then the threat beyond the horizon was unlike anything they had faced before. Mercer's gaze scanned the desert, unyielding, unwavering. The recruit they had once mocked was no longer ordinary. He was a legend, a force multiplier, and a premonition of the extraordinary. The base was secure for now, but Daniels understood the truth. Mercer's presence was the shield between survival and annihilation. Whatever threat lay ahead, Mercer would confront it, and the world, unprepared, would witness a soldier unlike any other. With the desert wind whispering across the base, Mercer remained vigilant. His mind calculated, anticipated, and controlled everything around him. Every Marine, every piece of equipment, every environmental variable moved in tandem with his awareness. He had become more than a recruit. He had become the embodiment of preparation, precision, and lethal foresight. And as Daniels watched the sun rise over the horizon, he realized the final truth. Mercer wasn't just a soldier. He was the ultimate solution to the unimaginable, and nothing, no enemy, no threat, no obstacle, would catch him unprepared.